It was upon one of those raw and colorless evenings in January when London, draped in its habitual curtain of smoke and dampness, seemed to have slipped into a torpor of grave, that the events I am about to recount were first set in motion. The wind, though not strong, was a cutting one, slipping between the bricks and crevices of Baker Street with a whistle that never quite became a howl, but seemed more menacing for its restraint. The yellow gas lamps burned with a hollow glare against the fog, and every footfall outside was swallowed in woolen silence. Chapter 01. Within the snug confines of 2 to 1B, I had settled into a quiet and familiar rhythm. The hearth glowed with coal, its embers lazily flaring now and then, and a Turkish rug muffled the world beneath our feet. Holmes lay as if boneless upon the settee, his hawkish profile cast in sharp relief by the flickering firelight. One hand was flung behind his head, the other rested across his lean torso, clutching the corner of an open monograph from the curling edges of the paper. I deduced it had been read several times before, clearly one of his own. He had spent the better part of the day in what I could only call intellectual indulgence. A stack of obscure treatises teetered on the side table beside him on the psychotropic use of Chervel in rural Bohemia, the ritual slangs of northern Mesopotamia, and one particularly grim volume on the incorruptibility of flesh and other phenomena of the tomb. I confess, titles alone unsettled me, but Holmes had been absorbed, even content, mumbling to himself from time to time, and occasionally chuckling at some grim curiosity. "You know, Watson," he said once that afternoon, without lifting his eyes from his book, in all the annals of recorded superstition, the tendency to preserve the dead with reverence often conceals a far more pragmatic truth, such as, I asked, feigning interest, though I was quite absorbed in an article from the Lancet regarding thoracic injuries, such as the avoidance of incriminating autopsies. He said no more and returned to his reading with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was Holmes at his most peculiar reeling in some private and macabre theater of thought. Hey, and I saw no reason to disturb him further. The clock on the mantel struck 6, each chime muffled slightly by the thickening fog outside. I had just turned a page when a knock, precise and deliberate, rapped thrice upon our door. Holmes made no movement, as though knocks were beneath his notice, but his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, flicked toward the hallway. Mrs. Hudson, bless her reliable soul, answered. I could hear a quiet exchange of voices, hers warm, the visitor's barely above a whisper. Moments later, she appeared in the doorway, her expression tight with the sort of professional calm she reserved for unsettling guests. "There's a gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes," she said. "A Reverend Chartham Key." He didn't give much more. Holmes stirred, sat upright with sudden energy, and tossed the monograph onto the table with an audible thud. "Show him in, Mrs. Hudson," and kindly closed the door tightly behind him. When the man entered, I confess that I was struck, not by his manner or dress, but by the air about him as if he carried some unseen affliction, a heaviness that infected even the atmosphere of the room. He was tall, though thin to the point, of gauntness, with a clerical collar beneath a black overcoat that was soaked from the hem. His gloves were worn, and though he removed his hat with proper politeness, his eyes pale and roomy never quite met ours. "Reverend Chartham," he said, his voice low but articulate, and nodded slightly to us both. "You will forgive the intrusion at this hour. My business is urgent and peculiar." "My dear sir," Holmes gestured to the empty chair across from the fire. "We are quite accustomed to peculiarities at this address. Please be seated. Would you care for tea or a pipe?" "No, thank you. I haven't much time." He took the chair stiffly, placing his sodden hat carefully upon his knees, as if reluctant to let it go. Holmes leaned forward slightly, fingers steepled beneath his chin, and fixed the Reverend with that disquieting gaze which always reminded me of a bird of prey appraising its next move. "You have come from Lambeth," Holmes said suddenly, without introduction. The Reverend blinked, visibly startled. "Yes, how did?" "Your boots?" Holmes gestured idly. "The soot of South London is finer than that found north of the river. You've walked some distance. The dried salt at your cuffs suggests the Thames path. You were also recently bereaved." Chartham's eyes widened, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind outside. "You're quite right," he said after a pause, "though I do not know how you see it. I lost my sister, Miss Lydia Chartham. 3 days past. It is her death that brings me to you." "I am listening," said Holmes, most gently now. "My sister lived alone at St. Agnes Convent, though she was not of the order. A guest, a recluse, in truth. She had taken up residence in the Abbey's eastern wing, a structure long disused, and in a state of some disrepair. Despite its condition, she insisted upon remaining. They said it afforded her quiet for her work." "What sort of work?" Holmes asked. "She was an antiquarian, researcher of ecclesiastical texts, spoke often of early burial customs, pagan overlays upon Christian rites, that sort of thing." "I see," Holmes murmured. "She was found in her chambers," the Reverend continued, his voice lowering to a whisper, "locked from the inside. No sign of struggle. And yet she was. I am told her expression was ... grotesque, as if she had died in unimaginable fear. Her hands were clenched, eyes wide. The coroner said it was heart failure." "But you do not agree?" Holmes prompted. "No," Chartham said, "because of what she wrote the night before." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and withdrew a folded slip of parchment, old and creased. Holmes took it and scanned the contents silently. I leaned over his shoulder, and though the scrawl was cramped and erratic, I read, "He watches behind the stone. His mouth is open but does not speak." I have made a terrible mistake. I should not have translated it. The darkness is not empty. A stillness fell over the room. Holmes read it again, then passed it to me without a word. "I have no wish to believe in devils, Mr. Holmes," Chartham said, "but I also do not believe my sister died of fright in a locked room with no cause. And the nuns? They refuse to speak of what happened. They have grown withdrawn, almost fearful themselves." Holmes rose slowly, then stepped to the window and peered out at the street as if weighing the fog itself. "Watson," he said without turning, "make a note we leave for St. Agnes at dawn, and bring your revolver." "My revolver," I echoed. Holmes finally turned, his expression unreadable. "Just a precaution. When silence grips the living, it is often because the dead have not finished speaking." The night passed fitfully, haunted by a restless fog that seemed to seep beneath the door and curl about the curtains. I found little solace in sleep, my thoughts tangled between curiosity and unease. Holmes, as was often his manner before a case, remained quiet and focused, consulting his vast mental catalogue of arcane knowledge while preparing for the morrow. By the time the first pale light of dawn sifted through the smudged panes of 2 to 1B, it were already packed and ready. The Reverend had taken lodgings at a modest inn not far from the convent grounds in Lambeth. The journey through London was grim and silent. The streets still slick with frost and hushed under the watchful eyes of early commuters and night watchmen. Holmes was in unusually high spirits, his sharp eyes glittering with anticipation, though not a word was exchanged until we reached the shadowed, forbidding outline of St. Agnes Convent. As we approached, I took in the structure with a critical. The convent was a relic of another century-old stone facade, weathered and darkened by centuries of soot and rain. Gargoyles crouched like sentinels at the corners, their features worn but still menacing. Ivy strangled the eastern wing, where the Reverend Sister had taken refuge. The windows were shuttered, many panes cracked, and a heavy wooden door creaked on its hinges, barely resisting the slow siege of time. Our arrival was greeted by a woman dressed in a plain black habit. Her eyes were sharp, yet shadowed. She regarded Holmes with a mixture of suspicion and weary resignation. "I am Sister Mary Ann," she said, voice low but firm. "You are the gentleman from London, Mr. Holmes?" "Yes," he replied smoothly, "and this is Dr. Watson. We come at Reverend Chartham's request concerning the late Miss Lydia." Sister Mary Ann's eyes flickered with something I thought might have been remorse, or perhaps a warning. "You will find little cooperation here. I must warn you, the convent is a place of silence and prayer, and some truths are better left undisturbed." Holmes inclined his head, the faintest smile playing about his lips. "Truth, sister, is often hidden beneath silence. Our business is with facts, not fears." She hesitated a moment, then gestured for us to follow her into the cloistered courtyard. The air was colder here, and the scent of damp earth mixed with the faint incense of burned candles. The convent's interior was a labyrinth of narrow corridors, vaulted ceilings, heavy oak doors that whispered of secrets kept close. We came, at last, to the eastern wing. The door to Lydia's chambers was secured with a simple latch, worn from use but intact. Sister Mary Ann paused before unlocking it, her hand trembling slightly. "It was here," she said softly, "that she was found." Inside, the room was sparse and cold, yet something lingered in echo of presence. A modest writing desk sat beneath a small window streaked with frost, its surface cluttered with half-translated manuscripts and faded notes. A lamp burned low, its wick producing a thin plume of smoke that spiraled upward and vanished. Holmes moved methodically through the room, his keen eyes noting details that escaped me. The faintest impressions on the wooden floor near the desk, the angle at which Lydia's chair was pushed back, even the subtle disturbance of dust along the windowsill. "Tell me, Sister Mary Ann," Holmes began, "who had access to this wing, aside from your late charge?" "The nuns," she replied, "though most avoid this wing entirely. The convent elders forbade entry after sundown. Miss Lydia insisted on her privacy, often working late into the night." "Did she have visitors?" Holmes pressed. "Very few, one or two scholars from London, but they were not well received." Holmes bent down and examined the floor closer. "Natija, this mark here," he pointed to a slight indentation near the doorframe. "It's barely visible unless one looked closely." Sister Mary Ann's face paled. "I do not know. I have never seen it before." Holmes straightened and turned to me. "Watson, observe the room. What is most unusual?" I scanned the sparse furnishings, a worn Bible on the bedside table, a crucifix hanging crookedly on the wall, a small brass key lying half-hidden beneath a stack of parchment. Yet nothing seemed extraordinary. "Perhaps the note," I ventured, "or the locked door itself." Holmes shook his head. "The note speaks in riddles, but the door was simple enough to open. No forced entry, no sign of disturbance." He crouched again by the window and traced a delicate finger along the frost. "But there is something else, subtle disturbance." "An intruder?" I suggested. "Not necessarily," Holmes replied. Cryptically, could be an animal, or a visitor who left no trace but a whisper. Suddenly, Sister Mary Ann spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are those among us who believe the convent is cursed. Strange sounds at night, shadows where none should be. Miss Lydia spoke of a figure she called the Watcher, behind the stone." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "The Watcher behind the stone," he repeated thoughtfully. "And the note mentioned his mouth is open but does not speak." I shivered involuntarily. "You do not believe in curses, Holmes." He smiled faintly, though the expression held no warmth. "Belief is irrelevant to the facts, Watson. Fear, however, can be as powerful a weapon as any dagger." We left the chamber, the chill of the room following us like a specter. Okay. Outside, the convent grounds were shrouded in mist, and the faint tolling of a distant bell marked the passing of another hour. Reverend Chartham awaited us near the gate, his face etched with lines of worry and fatigue. "Have you found anything?" he asked urgently. Holmes looked toward the eastern wing once more, then back at the Reverend. "Several peculiarities," he admitted. "The room was undisturbed, but the tension within it is palpable. Your sister's final hours were spent in fear, yet by whom or what we do not yet know." Chartham's lips trembled. "The coroner's verdict makes no sense. The medical men spoke of natural causes, but there was something unnatural about her death." Holmes nodded slowly. "Natural and unnatural often share the same stage, but the actor changes. K." He glanced at me sharply. "K. Watson, I suggest a thorough examination of the convent records, particularly those relating to Miss Lydia's recent activities and correspondences." I agreed, sensing the gravity of the task. "And the nuns, will they cooperate?" The Reverend shook his head. "They are bound by vows, and many fear the consequences of speaking out." Holmes tapped his fingers on the iron gate thoughtfully. "Then we shall have to listen closely to what is left unsaid." Our visit ended with an uneasy promise to return with the day's research. As we made our way back through the damp streets of Lambeth, I could not shake the feeling that the shadows clinging to the convent were older and darker than mere superstition. Holmes, ever the enigma, was silent, but his mind was clearly engaged, piecing together fragments invisible to all but him. I, his faithful chronicler, could only wait and watch, eager to understand the hidden logic that would one day illuminate this murky mystery. Chapter 2. The morning after our visit to St. Agnes's Convent found us back in the familiar, cluttered rooms of 221B Baker Street, though the fog outside seemed to have thickened, cuting the noises of London to a distant, muffled hum. Holmes had taken to his usual perch by the window, fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the sparse details we had gathered. Reverend Chartham had left us with a bundle of fragile letters and notes his sister had collected during her recent research documents, brittle with age, penned in faded ink. Okay. Many written in languages I could barely decipher, let alone understand. Holmes immediately set to work, his keen mind sorting through the ancient scripts as though each symbol held a secret to be unlocked. "I confess, Holmes," I remarked as I unpacked my medical bag, "this mystery treads far beyond my usual ken. It is no straightforward crime, but a labyrinth of fear and silence. It's precisely why it demands our utmost scrutiny." "Watson," Holmes replied, without looking up, "observe the nature of the evidence. Not a common murder or theft, but something, Dad, plays upon superstition and dread. The human mind is as susceptible to manipulation as the body is to poison." His voice lowered to a near whisper. "And fear, once planted, grows like a weed in dark soil." I found myself peering more closely at the documents. Okay. One letter in particular caught my eye, a note written hastily in English, apparently a fragment of a diary entry from Lydia herself. The writing was jagged, ink blotting some of the words, but the message was chilling. "Have translated the ancient curse. It says, 'He who watches behind a stone shall open his mouth, and silence will be his weapon. Beware the false comfort of shadows.'" Holmes glanced up sharply. "This is the buried clue. Watson, the key that will unlock the puzzle. But it is hidden beneath layers of fear and misdirection." He tapped the paper lightly. "It literal to be taken at face value, yet it is precise enough to indicate a threat cloaked in symbolic language. We must consider who benefits from such dread." Our first step was to explore the convent archives, a treasure trove of records that Sister Marianne had reluctantly allowed us to access. The small, dusty room was illuminated by the weak morning sun filtering through stained glass, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on rows of leather-bound ledgers and brittle manuscripts. Holmes moved with the grace of a cat, rifling through volumes with swift, assured motions. I followed more cautiously, mindful of the ancient tomes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries in their fragile pages. Most convents are meticulous in their record-keeping, Holmes explained, for it preserves not just fact, but power. Who was where and who did what is often concealed beneath layers of sanctity. We found records of recent visitors, financial ledgers showing purchases of rare manuscripts, and correspondences between the convent and academic societies. One particular entry struck Holmes' attention: a receipt for the acquisition of an obscure volume on pagan burial rites, purchased just 2 weeks before Lydia's death. Curious, Holmes mused. This book is titled The Watcher Behind the Stone, an exegesis of ancient guardians. It seems your sister's interest was not casual, but deeply personal. Do we know who supplied this volume? I inquired. Holmes nodded. A Mr. Elridge, bookseller and antiquarian based in Holborn. I suggest a visit. The deeper we delved, the more the layers of secrecy unfurled. As hinted at disagreements among the convent's elders, some wary of Lydia's research, fearing it disturbed things best left alone. A certain Sister Agnes, known for her severity and zeal, appeared repeatedly in the records as a figure opposing Lydia's work. Holmes's attention was particularly caught by a brief, cryptic note found tucked into one ledger. She dared to open the mouth of silence. The stone's watcher shall not be ignored. Cryptic indeed, Holmes said, eyes darkening. Someone is warning us sore, threatening. Later that afternoon, we made our way to Holborn to the antiquarian shop that Holmes had identified. The narrow storefront was wedged between a pawnshop and a tailor's establishment. The windows dusted with grime and cluttered with dusty tomes and curious trinkets. Mr. Elridge was a man of middle years, thin and sharp-faced, with spectacles perched precariously on his nose. His manner was guarded. His eyes darted nervously as we explained our inquiries about the book and its recent purchaser. Miss Lydia Chartham was a frequent visitor. He admitted, after some coaxing, is quite obsessive about the occult and ecclesiastical oddities. But I swear, I know nothing of any curse or watcher. Holmes's gaze pierced him. Rich, but do you also traffic in secrets? Was there anyone else interested in this particular volume? Bookseller hesitated, then lowered his voice. A gentleman, late at night, came in a fortnight ago. Tall, cloaked, and always wore gloves, bought a series of translations, but especially asked about anything dealing with guardian stones or statues that protects sacred places. Said it was for private study. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. An unknown figure. This could be a vital thread. Visit ended with little more than suspicion and questions. Yet, Holmes had already begun weaving these scattered threads into a pattern only he could discern. Back at Baker Street, I sat by the fire while Holmes paced the room, muttering to himself about stones that watch, mouths that do not speak, and the nature of silence as a weapon. His restless energy contrasted sharply with the oppressive stillness that seemed to cling to the case. In a rare moment of candor, Holmes confided, "Watson, it is the psychological aspect that intrigues me most. Fear used as a weapon, cloaked in ancient superstition to mask very human motives. Money, power, revenge." I ventured. Holmes shook his head. "Something more insidious, Watson. The manipulation of belief itself to make men prisoners of their own minds." As the night deepened, I realized this case was no mere murder or accident. It was a descent into shadows older than any law, where the boundaries between truth and myth blurred. And somewhere in those shadows, Holmes was hunting a truth that refused to show itself in plain sight. The days that followed our return from Holborn were filled with a restless energy that even Holmes, ordinarily so imperturbable, found difficult to quell. Our inquiries had yet to produce the answers we sought. Instead, they spun a tangled web of hints and half-truths, each thread more elusive than the last. The watcher behind the stone remained a ghostly enigma, lurking just beyond our grasp. Yet, Holmes, with his customary patience and unwavering focus, insisted that the breakthrough was near. "The smallest detail, Watson," he said one evening as we sat before the fire, "often contains the greatest truth. Task is to unearth it from the dust of distractions." That night, as the fog pressed against our windows like a living thing, I found myself unable to sleep. A faint knocking at the door roused me from restless dreams. Holmes was already alert, peering through the peephole when I stirred. "Who could be calling at this hour?" I whispered. Holmes opened the door to reveal Sister Marianne, her face drawn and pale beneath the flickering gaslight. "Forgive my intrusion," she said hurriedly, stepping inside. "There is something you must see. It concerns the eastern wing and the watcher behind the stone." Without waiting for invitation, she unrolled a damp piece of parchment, revealing a crudely drawn map of the convent grounds. A single annotation caught my eye. A small X marked near an ancient stone monument in the garden, alongside the words, "The Silent Guardian." Holmes examined it with a gleam in his eye. Clue hidden in plain sight. "This stone do you know its history, Sister?" Marianne nodded. "It is a relic from the original monastery, said to mark the resting place of an abbot who guarded the convent against invaders. The stone has always been shrouded in legend whispers that the abbot's spirit watches over the grounds." "Spirits rarely interest me," Holmes said dryly, "but legends often grow from kernels of truth." We agreed to investigate the monument at first light. The night passed in uneasy anticipation. The following morning, the convent's garden was a silent, frost-kissed expanse. The stone stood alone beneath a gnarled yew, weathered by centuries of wind and rain. Moss clung stubbornly to its surface, and the carved inscriptions were worn almost to illegibility. Holmes circled the stone carefully, his fingers tracing the shallow grooves of the inscription. I watched as his sharp eyes flicked from the base of the monument to the surrounding earth. Noting irregularities I could scarcely perceive. "Observe, Watson," he said softly. "The soil here is disturbed, not recently, but within the past few days. Someone has been here." K knelt to examine the ground. Indeed, faint impressions suggested something had been buried or unearthed. Nearby, a cluster of brittle leaves masked what looked like a shallow hole. Holmes produced a small trowel from his coat, his pocket one of many tools I had learned to expect from his seemingly endless Iran, carefully excavated the earth. After a few moments, his fingers unearthed a small object wrapped in faded leather. He opened it with care, revealing a delicate locket. Its surface etched with strange symbols reminiscent of the inscriptions we had seen in Lydia's manuscripts. Inside the locket was a tiny folded note. Holmes handed it to me. I unfolded the note and read aloud. "To he who seeks beneath the stone, beware the silence that speaks louder than words. The watcher waits for the fool who opens his mouth." Chill passed over me. Holmes's eyes gleamed with intensity. "This is no mere trinket," he said. "It is a message. Watson, a warning, buried to mislead or to protect. But from whom?" I asked. Holmes pondered, then looked toward the convent's shadowed walls. "Someone intimately familiar with both the convent's history and your sister's research. This locket was deliberately hidden. Our investigation into the object's origins led us once again to the convent's archives, where, after hours of painstaking searching, we discovered a marginal note in an ancient ledger. The handwriting was unmistakably Lydia's. Hint, the entry read, "The locket belongs to the abbot's heir wand, who holds the key to the watcher's silence." Holmes was clearly intrigued. The abbot's heir? A lineage, perhaps? Someone who claims a right over the convent's secrets. That evening, Holmes invited Reverend Chartham to Baker Street, along with Sister Marianne, hoping that the presence of both would stir recollections or confessions as the locket lay on the table between us. Holmes leaned forward and spoke with a gravity that commanded attention. Your sister was no mere scholar dabbling in dusty manuscripts. She was on the verge of uncovering a secret that certain parties would kill to keep hidden. The Reverend's face was pale but resolute. What secret could be worth such fear? Holmes's eyes glittered. A secret buried not only in history, but in power. It's the kind of secret that makes men lie, threaten, and even murder. Sister Marianne shifted uncomfortably. There are those within the convent who believe that the Watcher's silence protects us all. To break, it invites calamity. Holmes nodded slowly, or it shields the guilty. He then revealed an insight that had only just come to him, a leap of intuition that he carefully wrapped in deliberate ambiguity. The note's warning, the silence that speaks louder than words, is a metaphor. Watson, silence here is not absence, but presence. It is the unsaid, the hidden influence that controls minds and actions without a single word uttered. I found myself struggling to follow the full extent of his reasoning, as was often my position in these matters. Holmes, however, was more than willing to reveal as much as prudence allowed. This locket, he continued, is both a talisman and a threat. Whoever hid it wished the Watcher to remain unseen, but aware. And yet, your sister disturbed this silence, I remarked. Holmes's gaze darkened. Exactly, and for that, she paid the ultimate price. The room was thick with unspoken tension. Reverend Chartham asked quietly, "Do you believe the convent itself is involved?" Holmes's response was measured. In some form, yes, either actively or through fear that silences dissent. Our next step would be to confront the shadowy figures lurking behind the convent's pious facade. But before we could act, Holmes insisted on one final precaution. Watson, make certain your revolver is loaded. Our path leads deeper into the darkness, and not all enemies announce themselves. As the fire dwindled to embers, I was left to contemplate the cruel paradox of the case, a secret so potent that silence became a weapon, and a Watcher so feared that even his name invited terror. Holmes, as ever, was poised on the edge of revelation, his mind a razor cutting through shadows, but the true nature of the Watcher and the depths of human fear it commanded remained tantalizingly just beyond reach. Chapter 3. The days that followed the discovery of the locket and its cryptic warning were marked by a tension that thickened the air in Baker Street. Holmes became increasingly restless, as if the very shadows around us conspired to thwart his every effort. Yet, in his usual fashion, he maintained an outward calm, continuing to methodically examine every fragment of evidence and every whisper of rumor that reached us. The convent, with its cold stone walls and whispered legends, seemed to recoil from our inquiries. Sister Marianne, though more forthcoming after our last meeting, remained guarded. She spoke of strange noiseless footsteps echoing in deserted corridors, fleeting shapes glimpsed in moonlit gardens, of a pervasive dread that silenced even the most devout. Holmes and I returned to the convent on several occasions, each visit yielding more questions than answers. The shadows deepened, as did the suspicion that more than one person sought to conceal the truth. Our first suspect emerged. Almost inevitably, Sister Agnes, known for her stern devotion and zealous guardianship of the convent's traditions. She was widely feared among the nuns. When questioned, her answers were curt and defensive. She denied any knowledge of Lydia's death beyond the coroner's report and dismissed the notion of curses or watches as superstition unworthy of serious thought. But her eyes, cold and unyielding, told another story. Holmes, in his characteristic subtlety, observed her mannerisms closely, the slight tightening of her lips, the flicker of her gaze toward the eastern wing, the unnatural stiffness of her posture when the locket was mentioned. One afternoon, after a tense conversation, Sister Agnes abruptly excused herself, leaving behind a faint scent of lavender and something far more pungent and metallic, that I recognized as iron. Holmes raised an eyebrow. Blood, perhaps, he mused quietly. Around the same time, a new figure entered our orbit, Mr. Edmund Crawley, a local historian with a fascination for occult folklore and the darker chapters of London's past. He claimed to have studied the convent's history extensively and offered unsolicited assistance. His enthusiasm was palpable, but there was an unsettling edge to his eagerness, too eager, as if he sought to steer our investigation away from certain truths. Holmes regarded Crawley with wary eyes. "Your knowledge is impressive," he said one evening at 2 to 1B, "but I wonder, Mr. Crawley, how you came by some of your information." Crawley smiled thinly. "Let's just say I have my sources." Despite Holmes's suspicions, we invited Crawley to accompany us during one of our return visits to the convent. His presence, however, seemed only to complicate matters. His questions and comments raised tensions among the nuns, particularly Sister Agnes, who grew visibly agitated. Meanwhile, the coroner's report, which had initially been accepted at face value, began to show signs of inconsistency. I took it upon myself to review the medical notes. Drawing upon my experience as a surgeon, certain details troubled me: the description of Lydia's grotesque expression, lack of visible cause of death, and the assertion that her hands were clenched in terror. These were not typical signs of natural death, Holmes concurred. It is possible, Watson, that medical science has been blinded by preconceptions. The human body can betray secrets in ways only a keen observer can discern. To probe further, Holmes and I revisited the scene late one evening under the cover of darkness. The convent's eastern wing was cloaked in shadows, the windows casting faint glimmers onto the frost-hardened ground. Holmes's keen senses detected a faint sense, something acrid, faintly sweet, like a chemical burn. It emanated from the small chamber where Lydia had spent her final hours. Opium, perhaps, I suggested. Or something more insidious, Holmes replied. Eyes scanning the room, he meticulously examined the furnishings, the parchment on the desk, even the candle stubs for traces of poison or tampering. Yet no obvious sign presented itself. The deeper we probed, the more the walls seemed to close in. Letters went missing from the convent archives. Whispers followed our steps, and shadows lengthened in every corner. One night, Holmes confided quietly, "The enemy is clever, Watson. They have anticipated our moves and woven a web of lies and misdirection. But the truth has a stubborn habit of revealing itself." Just as hope seemed to wane, a strange occurrence disrupted the uneasy calm. A servant approached Holmes with a folded letter, bound slipped beneath the door of our lodgings. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the message brief, yet chilling. "Cease. Your inquiries, or the watch of silence will become your last breath." Holmes's expression darkened. "This confirms our fears. We are dealing with someone who wields fear itself as a weapon." I could see the toll this was taking on him, yet he masked it with his usual veneer of imperturbability. The involvement of multiple suspects, each with murky motives and cryptic behaviors, created a labyrinth of confusion. Was Sister Agnes, the zealot, hiding a deadly secret? Was Mr. Crawley manipulating events for some hidden agenda? Was there a darker force hidden in the convent's past, steering the shadows? For all my admiration of Holmes, I found myself grappling with doubt. The clues seemed contradictory. Every lead dissolved into mist. Even Holmes, usually so confident, spoke in riddles, urging patience and caution. One evening, over a meager supper, Holmes mused aloud. The best detective is not the one who leaps to conclusions, but the one who patiently watches the dance of deception unfold. He fixed me with a steady gaze. Prepare yourself, Watson. The trap is being set, but the true players remain. Hid. Okay. As we left the table, I glanced back at Holmes's study, where parchments and notes lay scattered like the battlefield of an unseen war. I realized that we stood not merely at the edge of a mystery, but at the threshold of something far more dangerous where belief, fear, and power entwined in a deadly embrace. The watcher behind the stone was no longer a distant legend, but a living threat, and the silence that guarded it promised a reckoning yet to come. The air in Baker Street had grown thick with anticipation, as though the very walls were bracing themselves for what was to come. Holmes, ever the master of patience and calculation, had taken to an almost imperceptible intensity in his demeanor, a subtle tightening of his jaw, a sharper gleam in his eye, as if every breath he drew was a measured step toward a long-planned conclusion. Watson, he said one evening, his voice low and deliberate. The game is at its most perilous when the players believe the stakes are unknown. It is time to set the trap. For once, Holmes allowed himself no explanation beyond the cryptic. We made our preparations carefully, with an unspoken understanding that this was no mere pursuit of fact, a pet, a duel of minds, a battle to draw the hidden adversary out of their shadowed refuge. Our first move was to return to St. Agnes's convent under the guise of withdrawal. Holmes sent a discreet message to Reverend Chartham and Sister Marianne, informing them that our inquiries would cease, at least publicly. The intention was to lull any watchers into complacency. Holmes and I arrived late one evening, after the convent had fallen into a somber silence. The fog hung thick and low, curling around the ancient stones like ghostly fingers. The garden, where the watcher's stone stood sentinel, was obscured in twilight shadows. I want you to observe closely, Watson, Holmes whispered as we approached the eastern wing. The eyes that watch us now will be those who seek to remain hidden. Beside Lydia's old chamber, we placed a replica of the locket in clear view on her writing desk, ensuring it caught the faint flicker of candlelight. Nearby, Holmes arranged several papers with faint traces of Lydia's handwriting, fragments of her research scattered deliberately. The stage was set, and now we waited hours past in tense silence. The convent's clock struck midnight, its toll echoing through the cold stone corridors like a dirge. Every creak and whisper of wind set my nerves alight. Holmes sat motionless, eyes fixed like a hawk's, absorbing every nuance of sound and shadow. Suddenly, a faint movement caught my attention. From the corner of the chamber, a figure emerged, cloaked and cautious, moving with the grace of one well acquainted with the convent's secrets. It was none other than Sister Agnes. Her eyes darted to the locket. For a long moment, she stared, and then her hand reached out, trembling but resolute, to seize it. Holmes rose slowly, his voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. Sister Agnes. The woman froze, locket clutched tightly in her palm, her face flushed with a mix of fear and defiance. You have been watching, scheming, protecting this secret, Holmes continued. Tell me, what is it about this locket that commands such reverence? Sister Agnes's composure cracked. It is a symbol of protection. The abbot's heir must not be disturbed. Breaking the silence would bring ruin. And yet your actions betray more than piety, Holmes said sharply. Who else shares this fear? Who else would benefit from silencing Lydia? Before she could answer, a sudden sound saw footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. The tension in the room became palpable. Sister Agnes's eyes widened in terror, and she whispered, "They are coming." Holmes exchanged a brief glance with me and motioned silently toward a hidden alcove. We concealed ourselves in the shadows. Just as the door creaked open, two figures entered, cloaked and masked, their voices barely above a whisper. They approached the desk with calculated caution, moving to retrieve the papers and locket. Holmes's voice rang out suddenly, startling them. "Quite the secret you seek to bury, is it not?" One of the figures whipped around, revealing a pale face partially concealed beneath a mask. The other produced a slender dagger, glinting in the candlelight. The trap had been sprung. What followed was a tense confrontation of wills and wits. Holmes's calm precision contrasted sharply with the panic and rage displayed by the intruders. The narrow chamber offered little room for escape or maneuver, but Holmes's knowledge of the convent's layout and my revolver at hand gave us an advantage. "Drop the weapon," Holmes commanded, voice unwavering. "There's no profit in violence here. Go." The masked assailant hesitated, then, in a swift motion, lunged toward Holmes. I fired instinctively, the shot ringing loud in the confined space. The man staggered, clutching his shoulder. Holmes seized the moment to disarm the other, wresting the dagger from her grasp. The intruders fled, slipping out a side door, disappearing into the night like SPECTRs. In the aftermath, Sister Agnes collapsed into tears, her resolve shattered by the violence and exposure. She confessed, amid sobs, that the convent sheltered a secret society, descendants of the abbot's line, sworn to protect the watcher's silence at all costs. Lydia's research threatened to unravel centuries of carefully guarded lies. She explained, "The locket is a key, but to what, none outside the order knows." Holmes listened intently, then spoke gravely. "Silence has indeed been a powerful weapon, but the truth would not remain buried." Reverend Chartham, who had been summoned, looked on with a mixture of relief and dread. Back at Baker Street, Holmes began to piece together the full scope of the conspiracy. The abbot's heir was not merely a figure of legend, but a living presence, wielding influence over the convent and perhaps beyond. The watcher behind the stone was a symbol of control, an ancient power masquerading as superstition to silence dissent and conceal its motives far darker than mere religious zeal. Holmes's final observation that night was his most cryptic yet. "Fear, Watson, is the oldest and deadliest of poisons. It can bind the mind more surely than chains, but once confronted, it can be dispelled, though not without cost." I sat in silence, pondering the cost yet to be revealed. The trap had worked, but the game was far from over. Chapter 04. The chill of early morning hung heavy in the air as Holmes and I made our way once again toward St. Agnes Convent. The events of the previous night had shaken the foundations of the case, yet the core truth remained stubbornly concealed beneath layers of fear and deceit. Sister Agnes' confession had opened a door, but it was only the first creak in a much larger mechanism. Holmes moved with his usual silent purpose, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow, as if daring the very darkness to speak. I kept pace, feeling the weight of the moment, acutely aware that we stood on the brink of revelation. We were met at the convent gates by Reverend Chartham, whose face bore the fatigue of sleepless nights and restless prayers. Without preamble, he led us through the winding corridors to the chamber where the conspirators had convened in secret. A hidden crypt beneath the eastern wing. The air grew colder and heavier as we descended, the flickering torchlight casting long, wavering shadows upon the ancient stone walls. The scent of damp earth mingled with incense, creating an atmosphere both sacred and sinister. At the heart of the crypt stood a small gathering: Sister Agnes, Reverend Chartham himself, and a figure cloaked in black whose face remained obscured beneath a heavy hood. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "The abbot's heir," he murmured. The hooded figure spoke, voice low and deliberate. "You tread on hallowed ground, Mr. Holmes. The secrets you seek threaten the very fabric of this place." Holmes met the gaze, unflinching. "Truth is never a threat. Only the fear of it is." The confession that followed was slow and deliberate, each word peeling back the veil on a history of power, silence, and blood. The abbot's heir revealed himself as Thomas Langley, a direct descendant sworn to protect the convent's sanctity through generations. The watcher behind the stone was not merely a legend, but a living guardian, a secret society bound by oath to silence those who would disrupt their order. Lydia's research had uncovered evidence of corruption within this clandestine group, abuses of power hidden beneath the guise of religious duty. Her death, the heir confessed, was a tragic consequence of a struggle between duty and conscience. I sought to warn her, Langley said, voice thick with regret. But others believed she was a threat too dangerous to live. Holmes listened intently, piecing together the narrative with the precision of a surgeon. The room was heavy with tension as Holmes confronted the heir about the locket, the symbol and key to the watcher's silence. It was meant as a warning, Langley admitted, reminder that some stones guard more than earth. They guard secrets that could unravel lives. Holmes nodded slowly, and yet the greatest secret was not buried beneath stone, but in the hearts of those who fear to speak. The confession unveiled the tapestry of hidden alliances, threats, and betrayals that had woven the shadowy history of St. Agnes's convent for centuries. The watcher was both protector and jailer, a duality born of human fear and flawed morality. As the heir recounted the events leading to Lydia's final days, Holmes's deductions became clear. Lydia had been close to exposing the society's darkest secrets, records forged, voices silenced, and oaths broken. The locket was her last link to the truth, a talisman meant to guide those who sought justice. Holmes's voice grew firm. Justice is not the domain of secret societies, nor is it served by fear. The silence must end. Langley bowed his head in acknowledgement. Then let it be so. Outside the crypt, as dawn crept over the city, I watched Holmes reflect quietly. Watson, he said at last, the mind is a labyrinth, and in its depths dwell not only reason, but fear, desire, and ambition. The greatest mysteries are those we create ourselves. I asked, and the watcher. Holmes smiled faintly, eyes gleaming with that familiar spark. A guardian, yes, but also a prisoner, bound by silence, haunted by the shadows it sought to command. Our investigation had reached its climax, yet the cost of truth was etched deeply in every face we had encountered. Justice, it seemed, was a balance between revelation and restraint, mercy and consequence. Returning to Baker Street, Holmes resumed, his place by the window, pipe in hand, the shadows of the case lingering in his thoughtful gaze. Cases such as this, he mused, remind us that beneath the surface of society lies a murkier world, one where men guard secrets not only from others, but from themselves. I realized then that Holmes's genius lay not merely in his intellect, but in his capacity to navigate these treacherous human depths with a clarity that few could emulate. The revelations unearthed within the cold crypt of St. Agnes's convent reverberated far beyond those ancient walls. This secret society, once a shadowy guardian of tradition, was now exposed, its influence weakened, its silence broken. Yet the consequences of that unearthing were anything but simple. Holmes and I remained at Baker Street in the days that followed, watching the city continue its restless march, while the storm of whispers around the convent swirled like a gathering tempest. Reverend Chartham and Sister Marianne continued their efforts to bring healing and reform, but I could see the burden of secrecy still clung to their faces. Holmes was more contemplative than I had ever seen him, pacing the room at odd hours, reviewing his notes with meticulous care. The locket lay on the desk between us, a symbol of the fragile boundary between truth and silence. I found myself reflecting on Lydia Chartham, the brave woman whose relentless pursuit of truth had ignited this dark chain of events. Her determination to pierce the veil of superstition had cost her dearly. Yet her legacy would not be forgotten. Holmes, I ventured one evening, as we shared a rare moment of quiet. Do you believe justice has been served? He regarded me thoughtfully, pipe unlit, eyes distant. Justice, Watson, is a complex notion, part ideal, part compromise. Here, we have torn down walls built over centuries, but the cracks they leave behind will take time to heal. Paused, then added, the silence we shattered was both a prison and a shield. Those bound by it suffered under fear, yet some found solace in its certainty. Word soon reached us that Thomas Langley, the abbot's heir, had voluntarily stepped down from his position within the convent's hierarchy. His confession had shaken the community, but it also sparked debates about faith, duty, and accountability. Reverend Chartham confided to me that the convent would begin a period of introspection and renewal. Though the scars of the past remained raw, it is a reminder, he said, that even in places devoted to light and piety, darkness may take root, and vigilance must never falter. Holmes, ever the observer of human nature, took a particular interest in the psychological toll this case had wrought. He remarked often on the power of belief, noting how the fear of unseen forces could twist reason and bend wills. It is not enough to reveal truth, he mused. One must understand the shadows it casts on the human soul. I saw this in the faces of those we encountered, the convent's sisters, Reverend Chartham, even Sister Agnes, who, despite her part in the deception, showed signs of remorse and a desire for redemption. Our final conversations with those involved revealed a community divided yet hopeful. The power once wielded by silence was now challenged by questions and dialogue. Old rituals and fears would not vanish overnight, but the first cracks in their foundation had been made. Holmes and I walked the foggy streets one evening, the gas lamps flickering like distant stars against the encroaching dark. Watson, he said, cases such as this remind us that the greatest mysteries are not those solved by logic alone, but those bound by the complexities of human nature. The watcher behind the stone is a symbol, yes, but also a mirror reflecting our own fears and desires. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle deep as I penned these final observations. I recognized that the story of Lydia Chartham and the convent's watcher was not merely one of crime and concealment, but of courage, consequence, and a delicate balance between knowledge and ignorance. Holmes, as ever, had guided us through the darkness, not by banishing the shadows entirely, but by illuminating just enough to see where the true dangers lay. Chapter 05. The case of Lydia Chartham and the watcher behind the stone had come to its close. Yet its echoes lingered in my mind long after the dust had settled. Holmes sat by the window of our Baker Street lodgings, pipe in hand, eyes tracing the delicate patterns of London's evening fog as it curled and drifted beneath the gas lamps. The city's pulse, steady and eternal, went on undisturbed by the quiet revolutions of truth and silence that we had witnessed. I often pondered the nature of Holmes's final words about fear and the shadows it cast upon the human soul. This case, perhaps more than any other, revealed that the darkness we seek to banish is not merely external. It dwells within us, shaped by belief, desire, and the weight of secrets. Holmes spoke rarely of his own thoughts on such matters, but that evening he broke the silence. Watson, he began, voice low and reflective, I have always believed that reason is the lamp that guides us through the fog of uncertainty. But it is a pale light, one that illuminates only what we are prepared to see. He turned to me, eyes glinting with a mixture of resolve and something deeper, almost sorrowful. Cases like this remind us that human nature defies simple explanation. The mind is a labyrinth not only of logic, but of fear, ambition, in the desperate yearning to protect what we hold dear, even if it means weaving lies and shadows. I considered his words carefully. Then, the watcher behind the stone is more than a guardian or a symbol. Holmes smiled faintly. Indeed, the watcher is the embodiment of those very human contradictions, protector and jailer, sentinel and prisoner. It is the silence we impose upon ourselves and others, the secret we hide in plain sight. He paused, drawing deeply on his pipe. Perhaps it is fitting that some mysteries remain partly veiled, Watson, for in that veil lies the complexity of life itself. The world beyond our window was darkening, the fog now a dense shroud over the city's labyrinthine streets. Yet within the quiet of our rooms, a fragile peace had settled. I found myself humbled anew by Holmes's capacity to navigate the delicate balance between revelation and discretion. His brilliance lay not only in uncovering truth, but in understanding the human heart, its shadows as well as its light in the weeks that followed. News of the convent's revelations rippled through London society, sparking debates in hushed salons and private parlors. The secret society's influence waned, but cautious hope took root among those yearning for transparency and reform. Sister Marianne and Reverend Chartham worked tirelessly to heal the wounds and rebuild trust. Her courage and faith in the face of such darkness were, in many ways, the true triumph of the case. As for Lydia, her memory was honored quietly, a testament to the price of truth and the resilience of the human spirit. Holmes, who often dismissed sentiment as an impediment to reason, surprised me by visiting her grave one misty afternoon, placing the locket gently upon the stone. Even the greatest minds, he murmured, are powerless without the courage to face the shadows. I sat by the fire that night, reflecting on the lessons learned. The world was a place of enigmas, where justice and mercy, fear and hope, danced a precarious waltz. Holmes's gaze met mine, sharp and unwavering. Watson, we are but observers in this grand theater of human folly and brilliance. Our role is not to judge, but to illuminate, to bring light where there is darkness, even if that light reveals discomfort and sorrow. And so, the case of the watcher behind the stone became one more chapter in the endless pursuit of truth, a pursuit marked by shadows as much as by light. As I close these pages, I am reminded that every mystery solved is also a mystery begun, and that the greatest stories lie not only in the facts uncovered, but in the silent spaces between. It has been several months since the case of Lydia Chartham and the watcher behind the stone concluded, yet the weight of its shadows lingers still. In my mind, London moves forward as it always does. The fog rolls over the Thames. Gas lamps flicker against the darkened streets. The city hums with a restless energy that both conceals and reveals. Holmes and I have returned to the familiar rhythm of our lives at 221B Baker Street, though neither of us remains quite the same. There is a quiet gravity in his manner these days, a subtle reflection in the eyes that at once seemed perpetually alight with sharp brilliance. Perhaps it is the burden of knowing how fragile the line is between light and dark. The city's elite have whispered the scandal in salons and private clubs, some denouncing the convent's secrets with righteous indignation, others hushing the matter behind veiled smiles and careful glances. But beneath the surface, subtle change is afoot, a tentative questioning of old loyalties and unspoken compacts. Reverend Chartham and Sister Marianne continue their work with quiet determination, striving to restore faith not just in their institution, but in the power of truth and reconciliation. It is a slow process, marked by setbacks and small victories, but their courage inspires even the most skeptical. Holmes, for his part, has returned to his chemical experiments and violin. Though the music carries a new melancholy, he remains inscrutable on the matter of Lydia's case, sharing only fragments of his thoughts. When I pressed him, he he remarked simply. Some truths demand solitude, Watson. The mind must sometimes dwell in shadows to understand the light. I cannot help but sense that this case, more than any other, has touched some deeper chord within him, a reminder that brilliance and darkness are often intertwined. Our conversations frequently return to the nature of silence, not merely the absence of sound, but a presence that shapes lives and decisions. Holmes once said that silence is the oldest and deadliest poison. I have come to understand this profoundly in moments of quiet reflection. I considered the cost paid by Lydia Chartham, a woman of courage and intellect who dared to unearth what many wished to remain buried. Her story is a cautionary tale, a testament to the peril and necessity of seeking truth in a world guarded by secrets. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I imagine the watcher behind the stone, not as a specter or a curse, but as a symbol of all the hidden fears and loyalties that govern human hearts. It is a reminder that the past, with its mysteries and mistakes, is never truly gone, but persists in the shadows, shaping the present. Holmes's final words on the matter echo in my mind. We are but observers, Watson. Our task is to illuminate, to understand, and, when possible, to forgive. As for me, I continue to document these cases with the hope that they might offer insight into the human condition, its brilliance, its folly, and its infinite complexity. The world is a vast and shadowed place, filled with mysteries both great and small. And as long as there are secrets to uncover, Holmes will be there, unyielding and relentless. Our partnership endures, a beacon in the fog. Thus ends the chronicle of the watcher behind the stone, a story of silence and revelation, fear and courage. But in London, as in life, every ending is but the threshold of another beginning. The game, as always, continues. Chapter 06. Though the principal mystery of Lydia Chartham's demise had been laid bare, and the secret society behind the watcher behind the stone had been exposed, I soon realized that some stories refuse to end neatly, as if shadows themselves cling stubbornly to the edges of truth. Holmes, always attuned to subtle nuance, hinted repeatedly that beneath the surface of even the most resolved case lay threads yet to be pulled, whispers of unfinished business echoing faintly through the fog of London's labyrinthine streets. One damp morning, as I sat writing in the parlor, a letter arrived, unmarked save for a seal I did not recognize, a serpent entwined around a stone pillar. The paper was heavy and yellowed, the handwriting elegant but deliberate. It read, in part, "The Watcher's legacy is not confined to St. Agnes alone. There are stones in this city that guard secrets darker still. If you seek truth, be prepared to pay the price." I showed the letter to Holmes. His pale eyes flickered briefly with a shadow I had not seen before. "Watson," he said slowly, "this letter confirms what I have suspected. Lydia's death was but one node in a wider network of secrecy, a web spun through centuries, binding not just convents, but houses of power and influence across London." I felt a chill at his words. The case we had thought closed now revealed itself to be merely a doorway. Holmes's mind, ever restless, began to map out connections, not just to the convent, but to the city itself. Two institutions cloaked in privilege and silence. Our investigations took us beyond the cloistered walls of St. Agnes to the opulent yet shadowed halls of London's elite. We found ourselves navigating drawing rooms scented with perfume and veiled threats, encountering figures who spoke in riddles and wielded influence like a weapon. Each step uncovered fragments, a carved stone hidden in a private garden, a faded diary entry alluding to a secret pact, a whispered rumor of a vanished nobleman whose name was never spoken aloud. Holmes's deductions drew a pattern, a society intertwined with the Watcher's legacy, stretching far beyond what the convent's crypt had revealed. Yet, as we ventured deeper, the dangers multiplied. Anonymous warnings became threats. Unseen eyes tracked our movements through fog-choked alleys. Trusted contacts grew distant or disappeared altogether. Holmes, ever unflappable, displayed a rare edge of urgency. "This is no longer a mere matter of superstition," he said one night, the glow of the fire casting harsh shadows upon his face. "It is a struggle for control over information, power, and the very soul of this city." I watched as the weight of this realization settled on him. For all his confidence, even Holmes was not immune to the burden of confronting such pervasive darkness. Among the most disturbing discoveries was a hidden chamber beneath an abandoned manor house, where we uncovered documents detailing covert arrangements, bribes, and silences maintained at the highest levels. The locket, once thought a simple symbol, appeared again, etched subtly into seals and crests, a mark of membership in this elusive order. Holmes's eyes gleamed with the thrill of pursuit, but also with the caution born of experience. What we face, Watson, is a battle, not just of wits, but of wills. These men and women protect their secrets with a zeal born of fear and ambition. They have survived for centuries by burying the truth beneath layers of lies. I could see that Holmes's relentless pursuit was pushing boundaries even he had once thought inviolable. Yet, amid this darkness, there remained a glimmer of hope, a conviction that truth, once revealed, could unravel even the most tangled webs. The city itself seemed to watch us, its fog a living thing that swallowed footsteps and whispered secrets in the night. Holmes moved with the grace of a hunter and the caution of one who knows that the greatest enemies are often unseen. I, too, felt the growing weight of responsibility, the knowledge that our actions could ignite forces far beyond our control. As we prepared for what lay ahead, Holmes turned to me with a rare smile, tinged with melancholy. "Watson, the game has changed. We are no longer merely observers of the mysteries of man, but participants in a larger narrative, one written in shadows and light alike." His words lingered as the gas lamps outside flickered, the fog thickening around our windows. The watcher behind the stone was no longer just a tale of a convent and a lost woman. It had become a symbol of a hidden legacy, a reminder that the past's secrets are never truly buried, and that in the shadows of history lie the keys to our future. With that thought, I closed my journal, knowing that the story was far from over. Chapter 07. The deeper we delved into the tangled web surrounding Lydia Chartham's death and the watcher behind the stone, the more it became clear that we were confronting not merely isolated acts of secrecy, but a vast, centuries-old, silent order woven tightly into the fabric of London's elite. The letter bearing the serpent entwined around a stone pillar was no idle threat, was a summons into the darker corridors of power. A challenge Holmes accepted with a rare solemnity. Our pursuit led us from the shadowed halls of convent crypts to the private estates of influential families, each guarding their own fragment of the truth. These estates were opulent facades, hiding beneath their ornate decor, a legacy of whispered pacts and veiled alliances that had long shaped the city's undercurrents. Holmes's eyes, sharp as ever, missed nothing during our visits. His methodical approach revealed subtle signs and unusual carving here. A misplaced document there that, when combined, began to sketch the outline of this secretive society. The society, it seemed, had extended its reach well beyond religious confines, infiltrating political and social spheres to maintain a grip on power through carefully cultivated silence. At a dimly lit library nestled in a forgotten corner of London, we discovered a ledger, its pages yellowed and brittle, but its contents devastatingly clear. Names, dates, payments, evidence of bribery and blackmail intricately connected to the convent and other key institutions. The locket symbols surfaced repeatedly, marking members bound by oath and secrecy. Holmes studied the ledger with an intensity that suggested He felt the weight of the world pressing down upon him. "Watson," he remarked quietly, "we are witnessing a long history of manipulation designed to suppress inconvenient truths. It is a testament to how power is preserved, not by force alone, but by fear and silence." I could see the conflict in his face, the exhilaration of discovery tempered by the gravity of the revelation. This was a far cry from the petty crimes and simple motives we often encountered. Here, the stakes were vast, the players formidable. Our investigation, however, was not without peril. We became targets of veiled threats, subtle surveillance, and attempts to discredit us. Letters warning us to desist arrived at our doorstep. Shadowy figures trailed our movements through the misty streets. Holmes, for all his composure, acknowledged the risks openly. "This is a war of shadows, Watson," he confided one evening. "They have the means and the motive to ensure their secrets remain buried, and they will not hesitate to act." Despite the danger, Holmes pressed on, driven by an unyielding commitment to uncover the truth. Our alliance was tested as we navigated this treacherous landscape, reliant on trust and vigilance. During a clandestine meeting with a former insider, we learned of an ancient ceremony conducted beneath London's surfacing initiation into the order that involved the passing of the locket as a symbol of loyalty and silence. The insider's voice trembled as he spoke of the moral compromises demanded, and the consequences of dissent. "The Watcher's Stone is not merely symbolic," he whispered. "It is a binding oath. To break it is to invite ruin." Holmes absorbed every detail, piecing together how Lydia's defiance had threatened this delicate balance, and why her fate was sealed by those desperate to preserve it. In the weeks that followed, our efforts culminated in a gathering orchestrated by Holmes himself, subtle trap designed to draw out key members of the order. Invitations were extended under the guise of a scholarly symposium on London's hidden histories, a perfect cover for luring the secretive few. The evening arrived, cloaked in fog and tension. The grand hall we occupied was filled with figures whose polite smiles barely concealed wariness and guarded intent. Holmes, ever the puppeteer behind the scenes, watched and waited as conversations unfolded, searching for the telltale signs of guilt and allegiance. It was a delicate dance of words and glances, each participant wary of revealing too much. Yet Holmes's keen eye caught inconsistencies in a glance too long, a hesitation in speech that betrayed the presence of the silent order among the attendees. In a masterful stroke, Holmes revealed a piece of evidence in obscure inscription from the ledger, unknown to all but the order's members. The atmosphere shifted instantly, tension rippling through the crowd like an electric current. The trap was sprung. One by one, the waqai cracked. Under Holmes's relentless scrutiny, veiled threats turned to confessions, and allegiances were laid bare. The society's grip on the city was exposed in chilling detail, its members forced to confront the consequences of their silence. Yet, even as the truth emerged, Holmes was mindful of the delicate balance between justice and chaos. He brokered a resolution that aimed not to destroy, but to reform, recognizing that dismantling such a deeply rooted order required care and patience. As dawn broke over London, the fog lifting slowly from the Thames, I understood the profound complexity of our victory. We had shattered the silence, but the legacy of the Watcher and its order would linger in a reminder of the shadows cast by power. Holmes, pipe in hand, looked out over the awakening city and murmured, "Truth is a lantern in the dark, Watson." But even the brightest light casts shadows. The revelations from Holmes's meticulously orchestrated gathering sent shockwaves through London's corridors of power. Yet, the aftermath was far from simple justice. The order we had unmasked did not simply dissolve under exposure. It recoiled, its tendrils retracting into darker, more insidious corners. Holmes and I found ourselves navigating a city increasingly hostile, where whispers replaced open speech and trust was a currency in perilously short supply. Those who had once wielded power from the shadows now operated with greater subtlety, aware that our investigation had unsettled the delicate equilibrium they had maintained for centuries. Reverend Chartham, Sister Marianne, and others committed to reform faced mounting resistance within the convent and beyond. Their efforts to heal the wounds of silence were met with veiled threats and social ostracism. The quiet resilience they displayed was admirable. Yet it was clear that change would be a slow and arduous process. Holmes observed these developments with his characteristic analytical detachment, though I noted a rare shadow of concern in his gaze. Power that fears exposure is power that fights with desperation, he mused one evening as we reviewed correspondence detailing renewed efforts to undermine the convent's reformers. The locket, once a simple symbol, had become a potent emblem both of the society's enduring influence and of the fragile hope for change. It appeared in clandestine meetings and whispered conversations, reminder that the watch's legacy was far from extinguished. One evening, coded message arrived at Baker Street, hinting at an impending reckoning, a final, desperate act by those clinging to the old order. Holmes, ever vigilant, began preparations for what he anticipated would be a confrontation not only of minds, but of forces. Our surveillance revealed increased activity around the convent and other key sites linked to the society. Shadowy figures moved under the cover of night, their intentions unclear but unmistakably urgent. Holmes and I doubled our efforts, coordinating with allies like Reverend Chartham and trusted officials willing to confront the entrenched power structures. The city itself seemed to hold its breath, the fog thickening as if to shield the impending storm. Then, on a cold and bitter night, the reckoning came. A coordinated effort to sabotage the convent's renewal surfaced. A fire set in. The ancient library, narrowly extinguished by quick action. Documents crucial to the investigation were destroyed, and a message scorched into the charred wall left no doubt as to the perpetrator's identity. Silence endures. Holmes was undeterred. This, he declared grimly, is a warning, not a defeat. Okay, the forces we face are formidable, but their time is limited. He devised a plan to draw out the conspirators, employing a carefully staged leak of falsified information about new evidence bait, designed to tempt the order into revealing themselves. We waited, the tension palpable. True to Holmes's prediction, the trap was taken under cover of darkness. Figures attempted to retrieve the fabricated documents, unaware that Holmes and his allies watched from hidden vantage points. The ensuing confrontation was swift and decisive. Several members of the society were apprehended, their faces masks of fear and desperation. Holmes's strategy had worked, but at a cost. The shadow of violence and reprisal now hung heavier over those brave enough to stand for change. In the quiet aftermath, Holmes reflected on the nature of power and silence. "Watson," he said softly, "the battle between light and shadow is eternal. Each victory is tempered by the knowledge that darkness will always seek a way to return." He looked out over the city, its streets, a web of secrets and stories, some told and many untold. "But it is our duty," he added, "to keep the lantern burning, no matter how long the night." I felt then, more than ever, the profound complexity of justice, not as a single moment of revelation, but as a continuing struggle shaped by courage, sacrifice, and unyielding resolve. As the first light of dawn filtered through the window, I resolved to continue recording these stories, knowing that in the interplay of shadow and light, the true essence of humanity is revealed. The city breathed in restless rhythms as Holmes and I settled once more in the familiar embrace of Baker Street. The long ordeal with the watcher behind the stone and the silent order had left its mark on us all, a silent echo reverberating beneath the clatter of horse-drawn carriages and the murmur of London's foggy streets. Yet, in the calm after the storm, I saw a transformation. The convent had begun its slow but steady renewal, and whispers of reform stirred within those once bound by fear and silence. Small acts of courage, spoken truths, unveiled secrets were the fragile tendrils of a new dawn. Holmes, ever the sentinel of reason, returned to his experiments in violin with renewed vigor. But a subtle change shadowed his customary detachment. I could detect in him a deeper awareness of the fragility of justice and the endurance of darkness. One evening, as the firelight danced across the walls, he confided in me with a rare softness. "Watson, this case has taught me that truth is not an absolute beacon, but a flickering flame, vulnerable yet persistent. It can illuminate or consume depending on how it is wielded." He paused, pipe in hand, eyes distant yet sharp. "And in that flame lies the responsibility we bear." I understood then that Holmes's genius was matched only by the weight he carried, the knowledge that every revelation exacts a price. Every victory invites new shadows. Our conversations often turned to the nature of silence and speech, of secrets and confessions. Holmes remarked that humanity is as much defined by what it hides as by what it reveals. The watcher behind the stone was, in many ways, a metaphor for this eternal tension. London's fog had lifted somewhat, though the city remained a mosaic of light and darkness. Holmes and I often wandered its streets in quiet contemplation, aware that beneath the surface, stories like Lydia Chartham's waited to be told. It was this understanding that gave me purpose as the chronicler of our cases, to illuminate the hidden, to give voice to the silenced, and to bear witness to the endless dance of shadow and light in the final days of our work on the Watcher's legacy. Holmes received a letter from an anonymous correspondent. Its contents were simple but profound. "The stone may watch, but the flame endures. May those who seek truth never be extinguished." Holmes folded the letter with a thoughtful expression and placed it carefully upon his desk. "Watson," he said quietly, "this is not merely a farewell to a case, but a reminder of the path we walk. Darkness will always seek to return, but as long as there are minds willing to question and hearts willing to endure, the flame will never die." His words lingered in the room, a quiet benediction over the shadows. As I closed my journal, I reflected on the journey we had taken together, the mysteries unraveled, the dangers faced, and the truths uncovered. The Watcher behind the stone was more than a tale of death and secrecy. It was a testament to the resilience of human spirit in the face of fear. Holmes's brilliance, tempered by his understanding of human frailty, had shown me that true insight requires not only intellect, but empathy. The game, it seems, is eternal, a ceaseless interplay of light and shadow, knowledge and mystery. And in that game, Holmes and I remained steadfast players, bearing the lantern into the unknown.